January in Minneapolis, Minnesota had been particularly brutal. The temperature had dropped well below freezing, nearing 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind, sharp as a razor, cut straight to the bone, even through the warmest winter coats. A scraggly orange cat wandered the narrow, snow-choked streets. Her fur, once bright as an autumn maple, was now matted with grime and frost. For the third day, she had roamed without food or shelter, driven only by the primal instinct for survival. Her paws trembled, leaving faint prints on the crisp snow, and her large, anxious green eyes searched for the slightest hint of warmth. She passed dark alleys where the wind howled like a pack of hungry dogs, and abandoned storefronts where there wasn't a crumb of food. The city, absorbed in its own hustle, seemed to have turned its back on her. But at the intersection of Main Street and Grand Avenue, the cat paused. Ahead stood a building with vast glass doors, behind which glowed a soft, inviting light. A real, palpable heat emanated from there, promising salvation. This was Apex Luxury Auto, a premium-class dealership where the chrome bodies of cars gleamed, each one worth a small fortune. The cat didn't know what kind of place it was. She didn't care. She saw only the glass door, from which a weak stream of warm air escaped through a thin gap. Her strength was failing, her legs buckling, and her tail, usually held proudly aloft, dragged in the snow. She reached the entrance, pressing against the cold pane, feeling the internal heat barely brush against her freezing flank. Curling into a tight ball, the cat lay right on the threshold, tucking her paws and burying her nose in her fur. Her breathing was shallow but steady, as if she were clinging to the last vestiges of life. Passers-by, hurrying about their business, didn't notice the ginger lump by the doors. Only rare glances brushed over her, but no one stopped. The city lived its life, and the cat, small and unnoticed, fought for hers. She didn't know how long she spent by the door. Minutes blurred into hours, and the cold tightened its grip on her body. But the warmth radiating from the glass was the only thing keeping her from giving up. Sometimes she would lift her head, watching the cars drive past, the people in warm jackets, and the reflective windows that mirrored her own eyes, tired but still full of hope. At one point, she closed them, allowing herself to drift into a half-sleep where there was no wind, no hunger, and no loneliness. Meanwhile, a new day was beginning inside the dealership. Lights flared behind the glass doors, illuminating the polished surfaces of the vehicles. The sales managers hadn't arrived yet, but the stillness of the premises was deceptive. Soon, the familiar bustle would begin. Calls, negotiations, and multi-million-dollar deals. The cat had no idea that her appearance at these doors would be the beginning of something much bigger than just an attempt to get warm. She just lay there, small and fragile, in the shadow of a luxurious world that didn't yet know of her existence. But fate was already preparing a turning point. In the distance, the sound of an approaching car could be heard. An old Ford Taurus braked by the staff entrance, and a man in a dark security uniform stepped out. This was George Peterson, a man whose heart, tempered by years of work and the harsh Midwestern winter, still held compassion. He headed toward the main entrance to unlock the showroom, and his gaze immediately fell upon the ginger ball by the doors. The man stopped. Images of the 3 cats waiting for him at home, their warm sides and trusting looks, flashed through his mind. He understood. This cat wasn't just there by chance. She was seeking refuge. George crouched down, examining the find carefully. The cat opened her eyes slightly but didn't move. Her gaze was full of exhaustion but devoid of fear. "Poor thing," he muttered, breathing out a cloud of vapor. "How long have you been freezing here?" He noticed how her body shivered, how the frost had covered her fur in a thin layer. The man stood up, glanced at the empty street, and made a decision. He couldn't just walk past. Not today. In his pocket was a wrapped sandwich, his breakfast, lovingly prepared by his wife, Helen, sausage, bread, a little mustard, nothing special. But for a cat that hadn't eaten in days, it could be salvation. George returned to his car, opened the door, and retrieved the sandwich. Unwrapping the foil, he broke off a piece of the sausage and gently placed it in front of the cat. She sniffed, her nose twitching. Slowly, as if in disbelief, she reached for the food. Her paws still trembled, but hunger took over. She snatched the piece and began gulping it down greedily, and George watched her, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. He didn't know that this cat would change more than just his day, but the life of the entire dealership. George Peterson stood by the glass doors of the dealership, still watching the orange cat devour the pieces of sausage. The morning frost nipped at his cheeks, but he didn't notice the cold. His thoughts were consumed by this tiny visitor, whose green eyes seemed to thank him without words. He adjusted his uniform cap, wiped his frozen fingers on his jacket, and checked his watch. 7:30 a.m., time to open the showroom. But something inside told him that he couldn't just leave the cat on the street. She wouldn't survive another night in this cold. Inside Apex Luxury Auto, the cleanliness was sterile. The floors gleamed, reflecting the light of the chandeliers, and the cars, black, silver, and pristine white, stood in perfect order like museum exhibits. George's footsteps echoed hollowly in the silence as he walked past the row of vehicles, each one worth more than he would earn in a lifetime. Usually, he loved this time. The early morning, when the showroom was empty and the world outside was still asleep. But today, the silence felt heavy, as if anticipating something. He headed to the staff break room where his belongings were kept. On the old wooden table sat a thermos of tea he'd brought from home. Nearby were the remnants of the sandwich wrapped in foil. George thought for a moment. The sausage was gone, but there was always something to snack on in the break room fridge. He opened the door and found half a package of cheese, a bit of yesterday's bread, and a small jar of pâté that one of the managers had forgotten after a corporate party. "It'll do for the cat," he mumbled, though deep down he knew it wasn't exactly suitable food for an animal. But what else could he do? The pet store across the street wouldn't open for another hour. The cat looked like every minute counted. Returning to the doors, he crouched beside her again. The cat had finished the last piece of sausage and now sat, swaying slightly from weakness. Her fur, covered in frost, began to thaw, and a small puddle formed on the glass beneath her. George cautiously extended his hand, expecting her to flinch, but the cat only looked at him. Her gaze held no fear or aggression, just endless exhaustion and something else, like trust. "Well now, Ginger," he said softly, "have a little more to eat, and then we'll figure out what to do with you." He broke the bread into small pieces, spread a thin layer of pâté on them, and placed them before her. The cat sniffed, her whiskers twitching. She began to eat slowly, as if afraid the food would disappear. George watched her tackle the crumbs and remembered his first cat, Ranger, whom he'd found as a boy. Ranger had also been a stray, skinny and scruffy, but after a couple of months he turned into a sleek, handsome tomcat. "Maybe you'll be like that too," he thought, though he knew a cat had no place in a luxury car dealership. It wasn't a shelter, nor was it his home. Everything here was subject to strict rules, and the director, David Vincent, couldn't stand mess. But George's heart wouldn't listen to reason. He knew he had 3 cats waiting for him at home, Muffin, Gus, and Belle, whom his wife spoiled like children. Every evening he returned to their purring, to the warm bodies rubbing against his legs. To leave this cat outside was to betray them. He sighed, stood up, and went back to the break room. In the corner stood a cardboard box that had once held coffee pods for the espresso machine. He pulled it out, dusted it off, and placed inside an old rag they used for wiping windows. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing," he decided. Returning to the entrance, he placed the box next to the cat and gently nudged her toward it. "Come on, Ginger," he called softly. "At least the wind won't cut through here." The cat looked at the box, then at him. Her movements were slow, as if she were weighing whether to trust him. But hunger and cold had done their work. She hesitantly stepped forward, climbed into the box, and curled up on the rag. George noticed her breathing become slightly more even, and the tremor in her paws began to subside. He smiled, though he knew this was only a temporary solution. The clock already showed 8 o'clock a.m. Soon the managers would arrive, and the workday would begin. What would Allison, the senior manager, say when she saw a cat at the entrance? And, more importantly, what would David Vincent say if he found her here? George knew the director valued order above all else. He'd once fired a cleaner for a spot on the conference room carpet, and now there was a live cat, a stray no less. But the thought of chasing her away seemed unbearable to George. He remembered a time, many years ago, when his own daughter had brought home a kitten she'd found in the basement. He'd grumbled then, saying they didn't need another mouth to feed. But that kitten had become part of the family. And now George couldn't imagine life without his furry friends. He decided he would talk to Allison. She was young, but had a kind heart. Maybe she would agree to help? If not, he would figure it out himself. Perhaps he would take the cat home, although Helen would probably not be thrilled about a 4th pet. For now, he pulled out his phone and took a few pictures of the cat curled up in the box. "I'll show Helen," he thought. "Let her know what I gave up my breakfast for." He sent the photo and a short message, found her by the showroom. "What should I do?" The answer came almost immediately. "George, you're incorrigible. Feed her, but don't let her inside or you'll get fired." He chuckled, but deep down he knew Helen was right. Everything at Apex Luxury Auto had to be perfect, from the gleam of the cars to the smiles of the managers. A cat, even such a miserable one, disrupted that perfection. But George could no longer back down. He returned to the break room, poured water into a plastic jar lid, and placed it next to the box. The cat opened one eye, lapped at the water, and closed her eyes again. Her breathing deepened and her body stopped shaking. "Live, Ginger," he whispered. "We'll figure something out." In the distance, the sound of an engine approached. It was the first car, a Mercedes, belonging to Allison. George straightened up, adjusted his jacket, and prepared for the conversation. He knew Allison loved animals. She had a dachshund named Bagel at home. But a household dog was one thing, and a stray cat at the entrance of a multi-million-dollar dealership was another. He took a deep breath, cast one last look at the cat, and went to open the door. The workday was starting, and with it a new chapter in the story of the orange guest who didn't yet know how many hearts she was about to touch. The morning light streamed through the glass walls of the showroom, reflecting off the car's chrome details and casting intricate patterns on the floor. Allison, the senior manager at Apex Luxury Auto, parked her Mercedes by the main entrance and, rubbing her frozen hands, hurried toward the doors. Her dark blue coat billowed in the wind, and her heels clicked sharply on the icy asphalt. She liked to start her day before everyone else. It gave her time to organize her thoughts, check documents, and prepare for the first clients. But today, her usual rhythm was broken. She immediately noticed the strange sight by the entrance. A cardboard box stood right on the threshold of the glass door, and inside, curled up, lay an orange cat. Next to it was a plastic lid with water and breadcrumbs, as if someone had tried to feed the poor creature. Allison stopped, squinting. Her gaze slid over the cat's matted fur, over her thin sides that barely rose and fell with each breath. "Poor little thing," she thought. "How did you end up here?" She looked around for clues and noticed George Peterson fumbling with the lock on the staff entrance. "George," she called, walking closer, "is that a cat here this morning? Where did she come from?" The security guard turned around, his face, usually stern, softened. He wiped his hands on his jacket and nodded toward the box. "Looks like she was here since last night," he replied, trying to sound casual, but a warmth slipped into his voice. "Completely frozen. I gave her my sandwich. Couldn't just chase her away." Allison crouched down, examining the cat. The cat opened one eye, green as an emerald, and looked at her with wary curiosity. Allison felt a pang in her chest. Her dachshund, Bagel, whom she adored, had never known such need, but Allison understood well what it was like to be alone and vulnerable. She had grown up in a small town outside Minneapolis, where the winters were just as fierce, and she had often seen neighborhood cats seeking shelter in sheds and basements. Even as a girl, she had snuck them food scraps despite her mother's grumbling. "The poor baby," Allison whispered, reaching out a hand. The cat didn't move, but her whiskers twitched slightly, as if she were sniffing the stranger. "George, she's starving. What if we let her inside, just for a couple of hours, until she warms up?" The guard shook his head, frowning. "Allison, you know what David Vincent will say. This isn't a shelter, it's a showroom. The cars here cost $60,000, and he'll write you up for a speck of dust on the hood. A cat is absolutely—" He trailed off, searching for the word. "A total disaster." But Allison wasn't listening anymore. Her gaze was fixed on the cat, who, as if sensing the attention, slowly lifted her head. Her eyes, though tired, burned with an inner strength, as if refusing to surrender. Allison stood up, adjusted her scarf determinedly, and checked her watch. There were only 15 minutes until the pet store across the street opened. She knew they sold everything needed for animals, and the thought of leaving the cat without proper food was unbearable. "I'll be right back," she called out to George, already heading toward the crosswalk. "Watch her for me, okay?" The guard only sighed, but a flicker of approval shone in his eyes. He knew Allison wasn't one to leave a task unfinished. She always saw things through, whether it was a complex client deal or helping a colleague. George returned to his duties, but every now and then he glanced at the box, checking to see if the cat had run off. Allison, meanwhile, was practically running across the street. The frosty air burned her lungs, but she didn't notice. The thought kept circling in her mind. If not me, who? The pet store, Fuzzy Friends, was just opening, and the clerk, a middle-aged woman with a good-natured smile, was surprised to see the breathless visitor in a smart coat. "Good morning," she said, adjusting her glasses. "How can I help you?" "I need cat food," Allison blurted out. "And a bowl and maybe something else for a stray cat. She's hungry, frozen, right now." The clerk nodded, as if such requests were nothing new to her. She quickly put together a package, a pouch of wet kitten food, a couple of bowls, and even a small bag of treats. Allison paid with her card without looking at the price tag and hurried back. Her heart was beating faster than usual, not from the run, but from anticipation. She imagined the cat finally getting a real meal, and that thought warmed her more than any heater. Returning to the showroom, she found George Peterson by the entrance. He stood with his arms crossed, watching the cat, who was now sitting in the box, licking her paw. Allison knelt down, ignoring the cold asphalt, and opened the pouch of food. The scent of chicken in gravy wafted into the air, and the cat instantly became alert. Her nose wiggled, and her eyes widened. Allison gently placed the food in the bowl and pushed it closer. "Eat up, sweetie," she said softly. "This is for you." The cat, as if understanding this was her chance, reached for the bowl. She ate greedily, but carefully, as if afraid to spill a single drop. Allison and George watched in silence. In their small corner of the world, on the doorstep of a luxury car dealership, nothing was more important than this cat. Allison noticed the fur on her sides starting to shine in the morning sun. Not as brightly as it could, but still, it was a sign that life was returning to her body. "We should take her to the vet," Allison said, not taking her eyes off the cat, "to check if she's okay." George coughed, clearly unprepared for this turn of events. "Allison, are you serious? She's a stray. What if she's sick or has fleas? David Vincent will skin us alive." But Allison just smiled. Her resolve grew stronger with every second. She knew the showroom had strict rules, but she also knew that sometimes rules could be bent for something greater. She pulled out her phone and started searching for the nearest vet clinic, but the sound of an approaching car interrupted her thoughts. It was a black Land Rover, Director David Vincent's vehicle. Allison and George exchanged glances. Their faces expressed the same thing. "Here we go." The cat, as if sensing the change in mood, lifted her head from the bowl and looked at them. Her gaze was calm, but it conveyed a plea. "Don't drive me away." Allison took a deep breath, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. She didn't know how to explain to the director why a stray cat had appeared at the entrance of an elite car dealership, but she was ready to fight. Something told her that this orange guest would bring more than just trouble into their lives. The sound of the Land Rover's engine died away, and David Vincent, the director of Apex Luxury Auto, stepped out of the vehicle. His dark, perfectly pressed suit contrasted sharply with the gray morning sky, and his gaze, sharp and keen, immediately spotted the box by the entrance. He adjusted his thin-rimmed glasses and headed toward the doors, but stopped when he saw the orange cat, who was now sitting in the box, licking her paw after her meal. Allison and George froze, bracing for the storm. In a showroom where every detail was controlled, the appearance of a stray animal was tantamount to disaster. David Vincent was known for his strictness. He had once reprimanded a manager for a misplaced comma in a contract, and now, before him, was a cat, alive, unpredictable, and violating the whole polished image of Apex Luxury Auto. Allison clenched her fists, ready to defend her guest. She was already mentally constructing her arguments. The cat was freezing. She's not bothering anyone. She can be taken to the vet. But deep down, she knew that the director, whose philosophy boiled down to the words order and profit, was unlikely to be moved by pity. George, standing a little distance away, coughed nervously. His hand involuntarily reached for his cap, as if he wanted to adjust it to conceal his anxiety. The cat, as if sensing the tension, lifted her head and looked at David Vincent. Her green eyes met his gaze, and for a moment time seemed to stop. "What is this?" The director's voice was calm, but steel could be felt beneath it. He pointed at the box, not taking his eyes off the cat. "Who brought this here?" Allison stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but she tried to speak confidently. "That would be me, Mr. Vincent, and George. We found her this morning. She was frozen and starving. I bought her food, and he provided the box. We couldn't leave her. It's 0 degrees outside." The director slowly shifted his gaze to Allison, then to George. His eyebrows rose slightly, which for him signified the highest degree of surprise. A silence settled over the showroom, broken only by the quiet hum of the heating system. Allison expected a reprimand, or worse. David Vincent didn't tolerate insubordination, but instead he suddenly crouched down, carefully examining the cat. She didn't flinch, only tilted her head slightly, as if studying him in return. He uttered, straightening up. "And what do you plan to do with her? Leave her by the entrance for clients to trip over?" George opened his mouth to say something, but Allison beat him to it. "We thought maybe we could let her inside for a couple of hours to warm up, and then I'll take her to the vet to make sure she's okay. She won't be a bother, honestly." The director was silent. His face was unreadable. He looked at the cat again, then at the box, at the bowl with the remnants of food. Allison held her breath, awaiting the verdict. She knew that everything in the showroom was dictated by image, from the perfectly cleaned cars to the flawless smiles of the managers. A cat, with her dirty fur and unclear origins, was like a blemish on this glossy facade. But something in David Vincent's demeanor had changed. His gaze softened, and the corners of his lips twitched, as if he were suppressing a smile. "Let her inside," he finally said, his words sounding like thunder in a clear sky. "Let her warm up in the office, but I don't want a single scratch on the furniture. Understood? And keep her away from the cars." Allison and George exchanged disbelieving glances. This was the same David Vincent who demanded that there not be a speck of dust in the showroom. The one who had once canceled a coffee machine delivery because its design didn't match the aesthetics. Allison opened her mouth to clarify, wondering if she had misheard, but the director had already turned and headed toward his office, tossing over his shoulder, "And find her something better than that box. This isn't a cardboard warehouse." The door closed behind him, leaving Allison and George in stunned silence. The cat, as if understanding her fate had been decided, stood up, stretched, and carefully jumped out of the box. Her movements were still weak, but they held a lightness that hadn't been there that morning. Allison, still trying to process what happened, looked at George. Did he really agree?" she whispered. "Guess he has a heart after all," the guard mumbled, relief audible in his voice. "Come on, grab her before he changes his mind." Allison carefully scooped the cat into her arms. The cat didn't struggle, only nestled against her warm coat as if seeking protection. Her fur was cold, but beneath it beat a small heart that seemed to have begun to believe in people. Allison passed through the glass doors into the office area of the showroom where other managers were beginning to gather. Their eyes, full of surprise, followed her, but no one dared to ask questions. Everyone knew that if Allison was doing something, it was either with the boss's approval or with her own unmatched determination. The office was warm, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the light aroma of leather upholstery. Allison found a secluded corner behind the reception desk where a radiator emitted cozy heat. She put the cat on the floor, but immediately remembered the director's words about the box. In the break room, she found an old blanket someone had brought for winter lunchtime get-togethers. Allison carefully spread it out by the radiator, creating an improvised nest for the cat. The cat immediately climbed onto the blanket, turned around once, and settled down, tucking her paws. Her eyes closed, and for the first time that morning she let out a soft, barely audible purr. Allison watched her, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She didn't know what had made David Vincent make such a decision. Perhaps he had a cat he never talked about, or maybe he was just having a good day. But at that moment, she was more grateful to him than ever. The cat, who had been shivering from the cold only hours ago, was now lying in warmth. And that was a small miracle that she and George had brought about together. But the workday was only beginning. Clients would soon arrive, and Allison knew that a cat in the office wasn't just a sweet exception, it was a potential problem. What if a buyer was allergic, or worse, decided that a dealership where cats roamed was not worthy of $100,000? She looked at the sleeping guest and realized she was ready to stand up for the cat's right to be there. This orange cat, without even knowing it, had already changed something in the atmosphere of Apex Luxury Auto, and Allison felt that this was only the start. The silence of the office area was broken only by rare sounds. The light tapping of keys, the rustle of papers, and the distant hum of the espresso machine preparing coffee for the early staff. The orange cat, now comfortably settled on the old blanket by the radiator, seemed like a tiny oasis of life in this sterile world of glass and metal. Her fur, still not completely clean, shimmered slightly in the warm light of the lamps, and her chest slowly rose and fell with deep, calm breaths. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to relax, trusting the warmth and safety provided by strangers. Allison sat at the reception desk, but her gaze kept returning to the cat. She had already placed the water bowl, filled from the cooler, next to the blanket, and even found an old plastic plate in the break room to put out a little more food. The cat, having eaten her fill, wasn't rushing to the food now, but simply lay there, paws tucked, eyes slightly closed. Her whiskers twitched occasionally, as if she were listening to her new surroundings, studying them in her own feline way. Allison caught herself smiling. This guest, so fragile and inconspicuous, had already begun to change the office atmosphere, adding something living, almost domestic, to it. The other managers, gradually arriving for work, couldn't help but stop. Kate, the young woman responsible for processing contracts, was the first to notice the cat when she hung up her coat. Her eyes widened in surprise, and she immediately rushed over to Allison, barely containing her delight. "Who do we have here?" she whispered, leaning toward the blanket. "Where did the cat come from? Allison, did you bring her in?" "Not me," Allison replied, shaking her head. "She came on her own. George found her this morning. I bought the food. And Mr. Vincent?" She paused, still in disbelief. "He allowed her to stay in the office?" Kate gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. David Vincent, whose name was uttered in the showroom with respect and slight apprehension, was the last person they expected this decision from, but surprise quickly gave way to curiosity. Kate crouched down next to the cat, cautiously extending her hand. The cat opened one eye, looked at the girl, but didn't pull away. Her calmness was contagious, and soon 2 more employees gathered around the blanket: Ian, the technician, and Sarah, who managed the showroom's social media. Everyone spoke in whispers as if afraid to disturb the new guest's peace. "She's so cute," Sarah said, taking out her phone. "Can I take a picture for our Instagram stories? People love this kind of thing." Allison frowned, unsure if that was a good idea. She knew David Vincent monitored every post on social media, and a cat in the office could be perceived as frivolous. But Sarah was already clicking the camera, capturing the perfect angle. In one of the shots, the cat lifted her head, her green eyes sparkling, and Sarah excitedly breathed out, That's a ready-made post. Our followers will go crazy." Allison wanted to object, but she was interrupted by the sound of the door opening. The first client walked in, a man in an expensive gray overcoat with a briefcase in his hand. Allison quickly stood up, adjusted her blazer, and approached him with a professional smile. The other employees also scattered to their places, but the cat remained the center of attention. As if sensing the change, she sat up, surveyed the office, and slowly walked toward the corner sofa where clients usually waited. Her movements were cautious but confident, as if she had already begun to consider this place her own. Allison, after seating the client at the negotiation table, kept an eye on the cat. She climbed onto the sofa, turned around, and settled down, neatly tucking her paws. Her presence felt so natural that even the office's strict order seemed to accept her as part of itself. But Allison couldn't shake a slight worry. What if the cat decided to explore the showroom, or worse, jump onto one of the cars? She pictured orange fur clinging to the black hood of a BMW and involuntarily shuddered. She needed to keep her under control. Meanwhile, the cat, as if picking up on her thoughts, jumped off the sofa and walked back to the radiator, where she settled onto the blanket again. She lay down, stretched out her front paws, and began to groom herself, tidying her fur. Every gesture was full of dignity, as if she were not a stray, but the lady of the house. Ian, walking past with a folder of documents, stopped and grinned. "Look, she's already at home. Maybe we should hire her officially to chase mice in the break room." Everyone laughed, but Allison considered it. The cat really did act as if she knew her place. She didn't dart around, hide, or try to run away. Her composure was almost magical, and Allison found herself wanting to know more about her. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why was she on the street in such cold? These questions spun in her head as she prepared the documents for the client. By lunchtime, the office was filled with its usual hustle. Phones rang, managers discussed deals, and a second client was already in the showroom examining the latest model Mercedes. The cat seemed oblivious to the activity. She slept, curled up in a ball, only occasionally opening her eyes to check that everything was in order. Allison, having finished with the paperwork, walked over and sat down beside her. She gently stroked the cat's head, and to her surprise the cat responded with a quiet purr. This soft, soothing sound was like music, something the sterile showroom atmosphere desperately lacked. "You're a good girl," Allison whispered. "Hang in there. We'll take care of you." But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The cat might have found temporary refuge, but what would happen next? The vet, a shelter, or perhaps one of the employees would take her home? Allison didn't have the answer, but she sensed that this orange guest had already set in motion a chain of events that would change not only her life, but the lives of everyone who encountered her. She looked at the clock. An important client was due soon, and Allison hoped he wouldn't notice the cat, or, conversely, that he would notice, and it would become another small miracle. By noon, the usual business hustle and bustle had taken hold of Apex Luxury Auto. Phones rang non-stop. Managers shuttled between the showroom and the office, and the air was filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the faint scent of expensive car leather. The orange cat, nestled comfortably on the blanket by the radiator, seemed oblivious to this activity. She slept, paws tucked, only occasionally opening her eyes to survey the room, as if checking that everything was in place. Her presence, so unexpected in this realm of gloss and metal, added an inexplicable warmth to the office, as if a tiny piece of home had squeezed itself into the sterile world of luxury cars. Allison, busy preparing documents for a client, kept glancing at the cat, her heart still clenched with worry. What if one of the visitors complained, or worse, noticed fur on the sofa and decided that Apex Luxury Auto didn't live up to its status? She was already mentally figuring out how to explain the cat's presence if questions arose, but so far, everything was going smoothly. Employees, accustomed to strict rules, looked at the new guest with surprise, but without judgment. And the cat, in turn, behaved impeccably, as if she knew her right to stay depended on it. The showroom door opened with a slight chime, and a man in his 40s, wearing a dark wool coat, entered the dealership. His confident stride and expensive briefcase in hand betrayed a person accustomed to big deals. This was Oliver Stone, a businessman from Chicago who had pre-scheduled an inspection of a BMW worth $95,000. Allison, spotting him, quickly adjusted her blazer and headed to meet him with a professional smile. But her thoughts were consumed by the cat. She imagined Oliver Stone, who had a reputation as a demanding client, noticing the orange guest and becoming indignant. Her stomach tightened at the thought. "Good afternoon, Mr. Stone," she began, trying to sound confident. "Allow me to show you the car now. It's the new model, everything as you requested, all-wheel drive, premium package." The man nodded, but his gaze had already swept the office and stopped at the blanket by the radiator. The cat, as if sensing the attention, lifted her head and looked at him with her green eyes. Allison held her breath, waiting for the reaction. She was ready for anything, a disgruntled remark, a request to remove the animal, or even a complaint to the director. But instead, Oliver Stone suddenly smiled. Not a forced smile, but a genuine one, with an unexpected warmth. "Is that your mascot?" he asked, pointing at the cat. His voice was low, with a slight rasp, but there was no hint of annoyance. Allison hesitated, unsure how to answer. She glanced at George Peterson, who was standing by the entrance, pretending to check something in a logbook. He just shrugged, as if to say, "You started this, you figure it out." "Well, not exactly," Allison began cautiously. "She appeared this morning, freezing outside. We couldn't leave her, so we took her in. I hope she's not bothering you." Oliver Stone laughed, a short but good-natured sound. He walked closer to the cat, crouched down, and examined her carefully. She didn't flinch, only tilted her head slightly, as if studying him in return. Her green eyes met his gaze, and, for a moment, the office went silent, as if everyone was holding their breath to see what would happen next. "Not at all," he said, rising. "On the contrary, it's nice to see that people with heart work here. I have 2 cats at home, you know." He added, "One is as insolent as a bandit, the other is a lazybones. He sleeps all day. And this one," he nodded toward the cat, "she looks like a true lady." Allison felt the tension release. She smiled, unable to suppress her relief. Oliver Stone, whom everyone in the showroom considered strict and nitpicky, turned out to be unexpectedly humane. He turned to her, adjusted his coat collar, and added, "Let's see the car. If it's as classy as your cat, I might just be ready to sign the contract." Allison led him into the showroom, where the black BMW with its chrome wheels shimmered under the bright lights. She began to talk about the features, the navigation system, and the leather interior, but her thoughts were still with the cat. Oliver Stone listened carefully, asking questions, but occasionally glanced toward the office where the orange guest had settled back onto the blanket as if nothing had happened. His interest in the car was genuine, but Allison noticed he kept smiling, as if the cat had added something unexpected and pleasant to his day. When they returned to the office to discuss the terms, Oliver Stone looked at the cat again. She was now grooming her paw, tidying herself with such dignity, as if she were not a stray, but a purebred celebrity. He pulled out his phone, took a couple of pictures, and, without asking permission, sent them to someone via text. Allison tensed up, but he only grinned. "Showed my wife. She's a cat person. She said if I don't buy a car from a dealership that's adopted such a beauty, she'd never forgive me." Allison laughed, feeling the last drops of anxiety dissolve. The negotiations went surprisingly smoothly. Oliver Stone didn't haggle, didn't quibble over details, and when it was time to sign the contract, he did so with ease, as if buying a $95,000 car was an everyday matter for him. Allison, processing the documents, stole a glance at the cat. She was sleeping, curled up in a ball, and her soft purr was barely audible. "You really are a mascot," Allison thought. When the client left, promising to return for the car in a couple of days, Allison walked over to the blanket and sat down beside the cat. She gently stroked her back, and the cat, without opening her eyes, responded with a slight flick of her tail. At that moment, Ian, the technician, who had been watching the cat curiously all morning, poked his head into the office. "Did you hear that, Allie?" he said, smirking. "That Ginger only just showed up and already brought in a deal for $95,000. Maybe we should give her a bonus?" Allison smiled, but her thoughts had moved on. She realized that the cat's presence in the showroom wasn't just a stroke of luck. It was the beginning of something bigger, something that could change not only their daily work lives, but the perception of their dealership as a whole. She pulled out her phone and messaged Sarah, who ran the social media. "Maybe we really should post her photo. You know, carefully so Mr. Vincent doesn't get mad." The reply came instantly. "Already prepping the post. It's going to be a hit." Allison looked at the cat, who was now in a deep sleep, and felt that this small guest had already become part of their team. But what would happen when other clients found out about her? And how long could she stay in the showroom? These questions hung in the air, but Allison pushed them aside. As long as the cat was here and bringing good luck, everything else could wait. By evening, a hush fell over Apex Luxury Auto. The last clients had left the showroom, leaving behind only the echo of conversations and the faint scent of expensive cologne. The light in the office softened, and the cars in the hall, illuminated by gentle lamps, seemed almost alive, as if resting after a long day. The orange cat, now completely settled on her blanket by the radiator, lay with her paws stretched out, opening her eyes from time to survey the room. Her fur, already somewhat tidied by her own efforts, glowed gold in the warm light, and Allison, watching her, thought that this guest looked more and more like the true mistress of the showroom. Sarah, responsible for social media, sat at her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She had been working on the post that would introduce the cat to the world for several hours. Allison, having finished her documents, walked over and looked over her shoulder. The screen showed the photo of the cat. She was sitting on the blanket, her head tilted slightly, her green eyes looking directly into the camera as if she knew she was being photographed. The caption read, "Meet our new mascot. This ginger beauty chose Apex Luxury Auto for shelter from the cold, and we couldn't bring ourselves to turn her away. What do you think? Should we name her Lady or Princess?" Below, Sarah added the hashtags, #Apex Luxury Auto, #Cat Mascot, #Kindness. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Allison asked, nervously smoothing the sleeve of her blazer. "What if Mr. Vincent sees it and changes his mind? He told us to keep things subtle." Sarah leaned back in her chair and smiled, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. Allie, this is viral content. People love these stories. A cat, a luxury dealership, a good deed. It's straight out of a movie script. And besides, did you see how Oliver Stone looked at her? If he melted, our followers will definitely be ecstatic. Allison sighed, but didn't argue. She knew Sarah was right. In a world where social media dictated the mood, a story like this could be a hit. But deep down, she was still afraid that the cat, who had become the center of attention, might attract not only goodwill, but also trouble. She looked at the orange guest, who was now lazily stretching, and thought that the cat seemed completely unconcerned about her own fate. Sarah hit publish, and the post flew into cyberspace. A few minutes later, the girl's phone began to vibrate with notifications. Comments poured in one after another. "What a sweetheart! Good for you for taking her in. Name her queen. She's regal." Someone even wrote, "I'm definitely buying a car from you now, since you have such kind employees." Allison, reading the comments over Sarah's shoulder, couldn't help but smile. She had expected interest, but not such a torrent of emotion. By the end of the workday, the post had garnered hundreds of likes and dozens of shares. The story of the cat finding refuge in an elite car dealership began to spread across the city. One of the clients who stopped by late in the evening to discuss financing for an Audi noticed the cat and immediately took out his phone. "Is that the one from Instagram?" he asked, and Allison, to her surprise, nodded. The man, a sturdy guy in a sports jacket, immediately took a selfie with the cat and posted it with the caption, "Buying a car where they rescue kitties." The cat, as if sensing her growing popularity, behaved with dignity. She didn't run around the office or climb on tables, but calmly lay on her blanket, occasionally licking her paws. But her presence was already changing everything around her. Employees who usually rushed home after work stayed late to look at her or bring something from home. Kate, the contracts manager, brought an old toy, a spring mouse that her own cat had rejected. Ian, the technician, pulled a bag of premium dry food from his car, which he kept for strays he met on the road. Even George Peterson, usually silent, brought a piece of soft fleece from home to replace the old blanket. But the real surprise happened when another client walked into the showroom, a woman in her 50s wearing an elegant beige coat. She introduced herself as Eleanor Hayes, the owner of a chain of coffee shops in Minneapolis. Seeing the cat, she stopped, her face lighting up with a smile. "I saw your post," she said, turning to Allison. "It's so touching. I have 3 cats at home, and I couldn't ignore this." Without another word, she left, and returned half an hour later with a huge box. Inside was a luxurious cat bed, soft, with velvet upholstery, clearly not cheap. "This is for your guest," she said. "Let her sleep like a queen." Allison and Sarah exchanged glances, unable to believe their eyes. The bed looked like it cost more than half the staff's monthly salary. The cat, as if understanding the gift was for her, walked over to the bed, sniffed it, and then lay down regally in the center. Her green eyes closed, and a deep, contented purr rumbled from her throat. Eleanor Hayes laughed. "See? She knows she deserves the best." By the end of the day, the showroom had turned into a kind of community hub. People who had seen the post on social media started dropping by, not for cars, but just to catch a glimpse of the cat. Some brought packets of food, others toys, and one young man, who introduced himself as a blogger, even brought a whole bag of premium cat food, declaring he wanted to film a video about the most soulful car dealership. Allison, watching this, felt a mixture of pride and anxiety. She was glad the cat had sparked such a response, but she realized that such popularity would not go unnoticed. David Vincent was still silent, but what would he say when he saw his showroom turning into a cat sanctuary? When the workday ended, Allison stayed in the office to finish the documents. She sat at her desk while the cat slept in her new bed, occasionally twitching her tail in her sleep. Sarah, who was ready to go home, showed her the post's statistics: 1,000 likes, hundreds of comments, and dozens of messages asking about the cat. "It's a huge hit, Allie," she said, beaming. "We have to keep it going. Maybe start a poll for her name? Or film a video of her running the place?" Allison nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She looked at the cat and thought that her appearance had already changed the dealership. People who used to see only gloss and big money at Apex Luxury Auto were now talking about soul, about kindness. But what would happen next? Could the cat stay here, or would her popularity become her downfall? Allison didn't know the answer, but she felt that this orange guest, without even knowing it, had started a wave that would soon sweep over the entire city. The next morning at Apex Luxury Auto began with unusual commotion. The light streaming through the glass walls bathed the showroom in a soft glow, highlighting the curves of the car's chrome details. But the employees' attention was fixed not on the vehicles, but on the orange cat, who now sat proudly in her velvet bed. Her golden fur, already a little cleaner from the street grime, shimmered softly, and her green eyes looked out at the world with mild curiosity, as if she knew she had become a star. The social media post, which Sarah had uploaded, had amassed several thousand likes by morning, and the office phone rang constantly with people wanting to know if they could come and see that cat. Allison, flipping through papers at the reception desk, felt her heart swell with a mix of pride and responsibility. This small, fragile guest had already overturned the showroom's usual rhythm. But today was a special day. David Vincent, who had not commented on the cat craze until now, had called Allison into his office before the workday began. His voice, as always, was calm, but it held a firmness that made her nervous. Allison, adjusting her blazer, entered the office, expecting anything from praise for a successful PR campaign to a reprimand for turning the showroom into a cat circus, as Ian, the technician, had put it. The director sat behind a massive desk covered in documents. His thin-rimmed glasses gleamed in the light of the desk lamp, and his gaze was as sharp as ever. On the desk lay his phone, its screen glowing. By the look of it, he had just been scrolling through the dealership's social media. Allison held her breath, bracing herself for the conversation. "Allison," he began, leaning back in his chair, "I saw the post, the comments, and yesterday's sales figures. Do you know what I think?" She shook her head, not daring to guess. David Vincent rarely gave praise, but he didn't criticize immediately either. His words were always measured, like a hammer blow that either breaks or builds. "This cat," he continued, "has done more for the showroom's image than all our advertising campaigns last month. People are writing that we have soul. That's priceless." But he paused, and Allison felt her heart skip a beat. "But she can't just live in the office like that. Everything must be done properly." Allison nodded, not quite understanding what he was leading to. David Vincent pulled a business card from his desk drawer and handed it to her. It read, "Kindred Paws Veterinary Clinic, Dr. Anna Miller." "I arranged a visit," he said. "Take the cat for a checkup at lunchtime today. Full checkup, shots, microchip. If she stays with us, it's official. No strays at Apex Luxury Auto. And yes," he smiled slightly, "think about a name. Ginger doesn't sound very premium." Allison left the office, clutching the business card as if it were a ticket to a new life. She hadn't expected the director, whose strictness was legendary, not only to support the idea of keeping the cat, but to want to make her an official part of the showroom. Returning to the office, she immediately told George and Sarah, who were eagerly awaiting her. "He's serious?" Sarah's eyes were wide. "A microchip, vaccinations. Is the cat officially our employee now?" "Looks like it," Allison replied, still not believing her ears. "We're going to the vet at lunchtime. We need to get her ready." The cat, as if sensing she was the topic of conversation, stood up from her bed and stretched, arching her back. Her movements were graceful, almost regal, and Allison involuntarily thought that the name Princess, suggested in the comments, wouldn't suit her. This cat was more of a marquise, refined, but with character. By lunchtime, Allison and George carefully placed the cat in a carrier that Sarah had borrowed from a friend. The cat, to their surprise, didn't resist, only looked at them with slight confusion, as if asking, "Where are we going?" The drive to the clinic took only 15 minutes, but Allison held the carrier on her lap the entire time, stroking it through the grate and whispering soothing words. George, sitting behind the wheel of his old Taurus, just shook his head. "Allie, you're a cat person. You're not going to drag a fourth cat home, are you?" At the clinic, they were met by Dr. Anna Miller, a veterinarian with a kind smile and warm hands. She gently took the cat out of the carrier and began the examination. The cat remained calm, allowing the doctor to check her ears, eyes, and fur. Allison and George stood nearby, watching the process. Dr. Miller, finishing the initial checkup, suddenly frowned, examining the cat's face closely. "You know," she said, "this isn't just a stray." She pointed to the cat's ears and the shape of her face. "This is a Scottish fold, and a purebred one at that. A cat like this is worth $5,000, if not more. Someone either lost her or—" she paused, "or abandoned her." Allison and George exchanged glances. The thought that this cat, who had been shivering at the showroom door, might have been someone's beloved pet, stunned them. Dr. Miller continued the examination, took blood for analysis, administered vaccinations, and inserted a microchip. The cat remained calm throughout, only occasionally glancing at Allison as if seeking reassurance. "Her health is fine," the vet concluded. "She's a little emaciated, but nothing serious. Feed her good food, and in a couple of weeks she'll be good as new. Now, the microchip." She connected the scanner to the computer. "We'll check if there's any owner data." Allison held her breath. She suddenly realized she wasn't ready for the cat to have an owner. She had grown so attached to her over the past 2 days that the thought of separation seemed painful. The computer screen flashed, but no owner data appeared. Dr. Miller shrugged. "Looks like no one registered her, or the chip is new and the data hasn't been entered yet." They drove back to the showroom in silence. The cat, exhausted from the examination, slept in the carrier, and Allison thought about the vet's words. Purebred Scottish fold. Someone abandoned her, or she got lost? These questions gnawed at her, but at the same time a resolve grew in her heart. If the cat didn't have a home, she would find one here at Apex Luxury Auto. Back at the showroom, Allison put the carrier down and let the cat out. She immediately went to her bed, curled up, and closed her eyes as if nothing had happened. The employees, already accustomed to her presence, surrounded Allison, demanding details. When she told them about the breed, everyone gasped. Sarah immediately grabbed her phone. "This has to go in the post, a Scottish fold in a car dealership." That's a sensation. By the end of the day, the cat was officially named Marquise. Ian suggested the name, and everyone unanimously agreed that it perfectly suited her refined appearance. The social media post was updated, adding the information about the vet visit and her breed, and it once again blew up the internet. People wrote that they were willing to drive from other cities just to see Marquise, and some even offered to adopt her. But Allison, looking at the sleeping cat, knew that for now, Marquise would stay here. She had become more than just a mascot. She was a symbol of something greater, a kindness that, as it turned out, could flourish even in the world of expensive cars. But somewhere deep down, Allison felt that Marquise's story wasn't over yet. Someone might still be looking for her, and that someone could appear at any moment, changing everything. Evening wrapped Apex Luxury Auto in the soft glow of city lights, which reflected in the glass walls of the showroom, turning it into a mirrored labyrinth of light. Inside, it was quiet. Employees were finishing their tasks, preparing to close, and the cars, like silent sentries, waited for their new owners. Marquise, as the cat was now officially called, lay in her luxurious bed. Her golden fur shimmered softly under the lamplight. She was lazily grooming her paw, but her ears were alert, catching every rustle. Her presence had become familiar to everyone, but today something new lingered in the air, a feeling of impending change that no one could explain. Allison sat at her desk, checking the daily reports. The post about Marquise, updated with the news of her breed, continued to gain popularity. Messages from followers poured in, and someone even suggested organizing a fundraiser for her upkeep. But Allison couldn't focus on the numbers. Her thoughts kept returning to the vet's words. Purebred Scottish fold. Someone lost her or abandoned her. That phrase was stuck in her head like a splinter, causing vague uneasiness. What if the former owner showed up? And would they want to take Marquise back? Her reflection was interrupted by the sound of the door opening. A girl in her 20s, dressed in a long, dark gray coat, entered the office. Her blonde hair was pulled into a messy bun, and in her hands she held a phone, the screen of which displayed the familiar photo of Marquise from social media. The girl looked distressed. Her eyes darted around the office until they settled on the bed by the radiator. She froze. Her lips trembled, and Allison immediately knew that this guest had not come for a car. "Is that her?" the girl asked quietly, walking closer to the bed. Her voice was shaky, as if she were holding back tears. "That's Muffin." Allison stood up, feeling her heart clench. She glanced at George Peterson, who had just walked into the office with a check journal. He, too, noticed the girl and stopped, frowning. Marquise, as if sensing the tension, lifted her head and looked at the guest. Her green eyes narrowed, but she didn't move from her spot, only giving a slight twitch of her tail. "Hello?" Allison began, trying to keep her voice calm. "Are you here about the cat? How do you know her?" The girl, without taking her eyes off Marquise, pulled an old worn collar with a small heart-shaped locket from her pocket. She held it out to Allison, her fingers trembling slightly. "This is her collar. I lost her 3 months ago. She ran away from home when I was moving. I looked for her everywhere, posted flyers, wrote to groups, and then I saw your post. That's definitely her." "Muffin." Allison took the collar, examining it. The locket was slightly scratched, but it had the name Muffin engraved on it, along with a phone number that seemed to be out of service now. She looked at Marquise, who was now sitting up, intently studying the girl. There was no joy of recognition in her gaze, nor any fear, only wary curiosity. Allison felt a stab in her chest. She had grown so used to Marquise, to her quiet purring, to her regal way of lying on the bed. The thought that the cat might be taken away was almost unbearable. "What's your name?" Allison asked, trying to buy time. "Lily," the girl replied, her eyes still fixed on the cat. "I lived in an apartment complex downtown. Muffin ran out when the movers left the door open. I thought she didn't make it." Her voice broke, and she fell silent, pressing a hand to her lips. George Peterson, standing by the door, cleared his throat, breaking the silence. He walked closer. His expression was serious, but sympathy was etched in his eyes. "Lily," he said, "the cat was in bad shape when we found her. Skinny, frozen. Are you sure she's yours? And—" he hesitated. "Are you ready to take her back?" Lily nodded, but a shadow of doubt flickered in her eyes. She crouched down next to the bed, extending her hand toward Marquise. The cat looked at her but didn't move, only subtly scooted back. That movement did not escape Allison. She suddenly remembered how trustingly Marquise had leaned into her when she stroked her that first day. Why wasn't she running to her owner now? Or had Lily made a mistake? "Can I pick her up?" Lily asked. Her voice was almost pleading. "I missed her so much." Allison felt everything inside tighten up. She wanted to say yes, but something held her back. She looked at George, and he, as if reading her mind, gave a slight nod, as if to say, "Decide, but carefully." "Lily," Allison began, trying to speak gently, "we need to be sure this is your cat. She's part of our showroom now, and we're responsible for her. Let's do this. You leave your contact information. We'll check everything through the vet. If she's truly your Muffin, we'll be happy for her to go home." But she paused. "We just want to make sure she'll be well cared for." Lily looked at Allison, then at the cat. Her face clouded over for a moment, but she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "I understand. Here's my new number." She wrote it on a slip of paper, which she handed to Allison, and added, "Please take care of her. She means the world to me." When Lily left, silence hung in the office. Marquise, as if sensing the storm had passed, settled back into her bed and closed her eyes. Allison looked at her, feeling a lump in her throat. She didn't know if Lily was truly her owner, but something in the cat's behavior suggested the story wasn't so simple. Maybe Marquise really did run away, but why wasn't she happy to see Lily? Or was that collar not hers? George walked over to Allison, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll sort it out. We'll contact the vet tomorrow, check the microchip again. For now," he nodded at Marquise, "let her sleep peacefully." Allison nodded, but her thoughts were far away. She looked at the cat, who was now peacefully dozing, and felt that this story was just beginning. Lily might only be the first shadow from Marquise's past. What if others came for her? And what would they do if someone proved their rights to the cat who had already become a part of their lives? These questions lingered in the air as the showroom closed for the night, and Marquise, suspecting nothing, slept, surrounded by warmth and care. The morning light streaming through the glass walls of Apex Luxury Auto bathed the showroom in a soft glow, emphasizing the curves of the car's chrome details. The office slowly came to life. Employees exchanged brief greetings. The espresso machine hummed, preparing the first batch of coffee. And in the corner, on the velvet bed, Marquise was lazily stretching. Her golden fur sparkled in the sun's rays. She had completely settled in, and her presence was now part of the showroom's daily rhythm. But for Allison, the morning began with a heavy feeling. Lily's visit, calling Marquise her Muffin, had left a trace of anxiety that wouldn't lift. Allison sat at her desk, flipping through notes in her notepad, but her thoughts were consumed by yesterday's conversation. The collar with the engraved name Muffin lay in her desk drawer, like physical evidence that could overturn everything. She took it out, turning it in her hands, examining the worn locket. The phone number on it was invalid, but that proved nothing. What if Lily really was the owner? And why hadn't Marquise run to her, as cats do when they see a loved one? These questions spun in her head as Allison dialed the number for Kindred Paws Veterinary Clinic to arrange another microchip check. Dr. Anna Miller, the vet, answered almost immediately. Her voice was just as warm as before, but it held a professional focus. "Allison, I already checked the microchip database," she said. "Nothing new. The chip is clean, no registration. But I can send out a request to regional shelter and clinic databases. Sometimes owners don't register their animals right away. That will take a couple of days." "What happened? Is someone claiming your star?" Allison briefly recounted Lily's visit, mentioning the collar and her certainty that Marquise was her muffin. Dr. Miller thoughtfully hummed. "Interesting," she said. "Cats usually recognize their people. If Marquise didn't react, it could mean Lily is either mistaken or—" She paused. "The cat doesn't want to remember her. That happens if an animal has experienced stress. Bring her in again if you like. I'll check for any other marks or scars that might clarify things." Allison thanked her and hung up. She looked at Marquise, who was now sitting up, grooming her paw with such dignity as if preparing for a photo shoot. Her green eyes briefly met Allison's gaze, and a spark of trust flickered in them. Allison felt her resolve strengthen. She would not allow Marquise to be taken until she was convinced it was the right decision. But how could she verify the truth? At that moment, Sarah walked into the office, holding her phone and beaming with excitement. "Allison, did you see?" she exclaimed, showing the screen. "The post about Marquise made it to the top of the local community pages. People are writing that they're willing to travel here just to see her. One guy even offered to make T-shirts with her face and the caption, 'Apex Luxury Auto Mascot.'" Allison smiled, but her smile was strained. She couldn't shake the thought that Marquise's popularity might attract not only well-wishers, but also those who wanted to use her story for their own gain. She was about to answer when the showroom door opened and a young man in a leather jacket with a tattoo on his neck walked in. His gaze immediately fixed on the cat bed, and Allison tensed. Another claimant. "Is that the cat from Instagram?" he asked, walking closer. His voice was loud, with a hint of assertiveness. "I saw the post. That's mine. Her name is Fluffball. I lost her 6 months ago." Allison and Sarah exchanged glances. Another story. Allison felt annoyance boiling up inside. First Lily with her collar, now this guy. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Hello," she said, standing up. "Tell us more about where you lost her. Do you have any proof?" The guy, who introduced himself as Andrew, began speaking quickly and incoherently. He claimed Fluffball had escaped from his apartment downtown when he was away on a business trip. He showed a photo on his phone, a cat resembling Marquise, but the picture was blurry, and the background provided no clues. Marquise, hearing his voice, lifted her head and looked at him. Her ears flattened against her head, and her tail twitched nervously. This was not a reaction of joyful recognition. "Andrew," Allison began cautiously, "we already had the vet check the microchip. She's not registered, and—" she pointed to Marquise. "She doesn't recognize you. Maybe you're mistaken?" The guy frowned. His gaze hardened. "What does it matter if there's a chip or not? She's my cat. I know her. Just give her back." George Peterson, who had been silently watching the scene, stepped forward. His voice was calm, but it held a firmness strong enough to stop a truck. "Sir," he said, "we didn't just take in this cat. She's under our responsibility. If you are her owner, prove it. Bring us documents, photos, anything. Until then, good day." Andrew opened his mouth to argue, but meeting George's steady gaze, he backed down. He mumbled something unintelligible and left, slamming the door. Allison felt the tension drain away, but the anxiety remained. 2 people in 2 days, both claiming Marquise was their cat. This couldn't be a coincidence. She walked over to the bed and sat down next to Marquise. The cat, as if sensing her distress, nudged her hand with her nose and purred softly. This simple gesture was like an anchor, bringing Allison back to reality. She stroked Marquise, feeling the warmth of her fur calm her. "Who are you, really?" she whispered. "And what secrets are you hiding?" Sarah, still holding her phone, suggested posting a request to their followers. If anyone knew about Marquise's past, they should write in. But Allison shook her head. She needed time to figure things out. She decided she would take Marquise to Dr. Miller again tomorrow. Perhaps the vet would find something else. For now, she watched the cat, who had settled back into the bed with her paws tucked, and thought that this small guest had brought into their lives not only warmth, but also a mystery that needed to be solved. By evening, the showroom was quiet, but Allison knew that the silence was deceptive. Somewhere beyond the glass walls, the answers to Marquise's past were waiting, and she felt that those answers could change everything, not just for the cat, but for herself as well.